Burlington. Thank you all for coming this afternoon to experience what we think is going to be a very, very engaging and enlightening discussion of this new show that we're so proud of, the Gender Conspiracy. My name is Robert Stephen. I happen to be employed here at the Art Gallery of Burlington, and I want to welcome you on behalf of our board of directors, our staff, our volunteers, and also on behalf of all those communities that we serve. You know, your support really helps us to do our work. And but just before we begin, we'll take a brief moment to think solemnly about the conflicts and injustices that have led to the fact that we now have the privilege, but also the duty to steward this land, which is within the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of New Credit, and is within the ancient One Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant and the Brant Tract Purchase Treaty, number 3 3/4 of 1795, and has been home over time to Attawandaron, Wendat, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. So, with that said, I want to introduce your host for today, the curator of this show, and our senior curator at the Art Gallery of Burlington, Suzanne Carte.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone who's coming back after being here with us last night, and some new faces as well. I've talked a lot about the show and the impetus for the show, just being the fact that it's an educational platform. So I think that today, in hearing from the artists, is going to be the next step in being able to further focus the works in the show. It was built out of bringing LGBTQ issues back into a public space, a public education sphere, which a gallery at its best can do. And I think that from here on in, every exhibition that we do at the AGB is built to change the fabric of who we are. And as I was walking, it's not lost to me, as I was walking from my office to the gallery, it was like, you can't have a gay event without glitter, and it's like all in the carpet, and it's never coming out. And I just feel like that's what this exhibition is going to do. It's just never going to come out of these walls. So what I want to do, so format, and this is the first time the artists are hearing format too, so it's really casual. What we're going to do is just a walk and talk. So we'll go through, artists will have an opportunity to speak to their work for about 5 minutes or so. We'll go around. I'll start with a question. Know that there's seats as well, and there's more in the back. So if you want to have a seat, please do. The floor is also comfortable, as are the beanbags in Jean's room. So I'm going to get all the artists to raise their hands so that you can see them first. So over here we have Isha Gray in there, Michelle Pearson Clark on the other side, Cyrus Marcus Ware, we have Wynn Neely, Kalaski, Samra, Tanya, Jocelyn. And so I think we'll start because we're right here. Is that cool? Yeah! I saw that face said no. With Kyle and Wynn do I know exactly, right? Do the tag team artist talk.
Oh, we're just going.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
No. Okay. Well, do you want me to start off with a question? Well, why don't you talk a little bit about the impetus of this series, and what it means actually to work together in something like this too? Because both as photographers doing your own work, but coming together to do this series, like what it meant for you to be able to work together.
Sure. My name is Wynn. I can give a little bit of a background into how this project came to be, if you want me to start with that. Kyle and I have been very close friends for over 10 years now. Our relationship has always been very intimate and very loving and vulnerable, and I think that has been of our relationship, and we always get comments and jokes about whether we're dating or not, and we kind of have always left that ambiguous to people, finding humor in that. And then Kyle and I simultaneously went through a very challenging portion of our lives and really difficult breakups. And we decided to get the hell out of here and go on a life-changing trip together. And kind of had talked about if we wanted to make a body of work together. And we hadn't co-collaborated on something to this level before. And we kind of just started making up scenarios in our head that would emulate the ways in which like an intimate couple would take photos together in like a travel sense, and the types of intimate photos you would see when couples would be taking photos of each other. And yeah, I mean, I can pass it off to you to continue on that, but don't want to steal the whole story.
Yeah, so we actually met a decade ago in art school, so we have supported each other's work, but never, like Lynn said, collaborated to this extent. And we started brainstorming all these different scenes, these kind of like iconic or typical images you would see of lovers, and moments, both like selfie style or like pose and looking at the camera, or like as if it was just a natural intimate moment, and set about creating those.
When we were, like, all of these photos are taken either mostly in Iceland or in Barcelona or in Paris, which was our travels together. And the Icelandic portion of our trip was the most powerful and I would say life-changing for both of us. Just like getting in touch with ourselves and like where we wanted to go from there. And when we were driving in the van and camping all around the country, the song Something to Talk About came on a playlist, and we listened to it and said, oh my god, this song is literally what people think about us. And we were like joking about how we should, if we made this body of work, how we should call it that. And then when we sort of had this show lined up and started thinking about all of that more seriously, I was kind of like, I think we should just call it that, because it actually works in sort of a multi-layer of like, the lyrics of the song really relate to our experience and our friendship, but also just the fact that the way we look at male intimacy is something to talk about in our society. So I think it works well in both of those ways. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, I think that's a really good segue into yes, you're like that. Yes, I think it's a really great segue into your work in regards to masculine intimacies. I don't know if we want to walk into the room. I don't know if you've all had an opportunity to see it or not. Do you think we can crowd it? Okay, let's do it. Yeah, it's big enough.
I'll just start with, I'm super nervous to talk in front of crowds right now. Okay, so this piece is titled Dancing the Light. It's from my body of work titled Man Up. Yeah, in this video specifically I wanted to showcase the connection that we need to have with each other, men specifically black men. In a time where you know, we're talking about healing and self-love and accountability, I just think it's important for us to have each other while we're going through this process. Yeah, two of the guys in this piece knew each other. One of them didn't know them at all, and I just kind of wanted to put them in a space where they can kind of feel free in their own space around each other. So that's basically what it's about. Relationship with these guys, the youngest one with the long hair, he kind of reminded me of myself when I was 19. And I just thought it was really important for him to meet the two other guys and kind of share space with that. So that's basically what it's about. To be honest, the video, there was no real plans around the video of how it was going to turn out. All I knew about the piece was that I wanted to have them dance to a song of their choosing. They were actually dancing to D'Angelo in this piece. So I don't remember what it was called, but it was off the Voodoo album. But yeah, I just think it's the show that I was a part of titled Man Up. I just wanted to kind of tackle the fact that a lot of men find it really hard to be vulnerable with themselves and with each other. And I just want to kind of bridge the gap of why we feel like we can't be vulnerable. And I think right now, it's really important for us to kind of explore that within ourselves and within, you know, other people. So yeah, this is what it is. There's not super intense things behind it. It's just, yeah, I try to allow people to have space to kind of take what they take out of that. But yeah, and I'm not a dancer, but I do enjoy dance. Yeah, it was great. I was kind of jamming behind. Yeah, I just love the connection that they have, and I feel like they found, especially the younger guy, I feel like he really found a lot of strength by being around these men. And so it was really nice to watch him grow specifically and come out of a place of feeling damaged and trying to find ways to express your feelings. Yeah, so he was like my main focus. Amazing guy, someone that you know, had a really rough upbringing and found a way to express that through ballet. And so I wanted to kind of showcase that and showcase black men specifically in a different light of what we're used to. And I think in regards to movement of bodies, I think it's safe to say that I feel like a lot of people think of dance for black men in general, that it would be like hip hop or an R&B, and you know, it was just nice to kind of have them, you know, this is the first time I actually met black men who also do ballet. And so it was an experience for me to be like, oh, like, we can do anything. Like there's so many things possible that I wasn't aware of, and to just kind of experience that on the other end was really nice. And yeah, this was like my first video installation piece that I've ever done. I'm usually doing digital photographs, so this was definitely an experience, and I think I'm gonna try shifting more into doing a little bit more video installations as well, and sculpture. Yes. Yeah.
Hi everybody, good afternoon, thanks for coming. So my name is Michelle Preston Clark, and these are the first 4 photographs in an ongoing body of work called The Animal Seems to Be Moving. And in this project, I'm exploring, for me, the intersection between my aging, I'm exploring the intersection for me between my aging, my blackness, my queerness, and my masculinity. So I've always been masculine. I came out of the womb this way, and I've always been read as younger than I am. And there's a prize for anybody who can guess my actual age. And so for most of my life, I've moved through the world, most often being read as a black boy. And last year I had a moment where, regular day, and I was brushing my teeth, and I looked at myself in the mirror and saw my face beginning to change. And you don't see it too much, but my gray hairs are thickening up as well. And I thought, okay, I'm beginning to age into my actual age. And what is that going to mean for me to no longer be read as a black boy, but to be read as a black man? And then I thought, well, that's probably not going to be good for me, because in our culture, a black man is a very threatening thing for many people. And in some ways, being read as a boy was a bit of a buffer in terms of how my masculinity was read as a threat or not to certain people. And so I was really struck by this overwhelming feeling of, this is so absurd, that on top of the fact that I have to worry about this knee hurts a lot, and my hangovers last a week now, that I have to worry about my life as I age, and I have to worry about more risk and less safety for myself in the world as a consequence of aging. And so I was really struck by that emotional response of, this is absurd. And I spent a lot of time thinking about that, and other times in my life where I would have responded to an experience of oppression with, this is ridiculous, this is absurd, and thought about how that's a coping strategy, because if you respond to everything with sadness or pain or fear or anger, I don't think you'd be able to get out of bed. So I just spent some time thinking about that as a coping strategy. So these photographs are designed to be a little bit absurd. So I'm trying to explore this experience through that emotional framework. Most of my work is about grief and loss, and I think many artists explore oppression and difficult emotions through a framework of pain and through a framework of grief, which I myself have done. And so this is a way for me to think about trying a different emotional register in terms of exploring something that is actually about loss, because I'm losing safety. I'm also in some ways saying goodbye to my queer boyhood, so there's a loss there. And in general, my relationship to masculinity, my entire life has been a paradoxical relationship, because there's so much that I detest about masculinity, the way it manifests in our society, but at the same time, my entire life, there's things that I've yearned for and longed for from and through masculinity. So all of those tensions for me are present in this work.
I'm going to hand it over to you, and we're going to walk over to see Cyrus's work, looking at family and family dynamics, and then also the family of the exhibition, which I realized, like, having Rodney in these two spaces, which is really quite nice, having that continuum. But if you wanted to talk a little bit about the Black Ants dinner.
Sure. So you can come a little closer and take a look. Some of the images are small, some are big. This is supposed to be reminiscent of those walls that you have at your aunt's house with all of the family photos and sort of an array as you go up the stairs, kind of. This project was, the jumping off point was, I was thinking about the ways that Black, queer, and trans people represent themselves, and self-representation is something that's really interesting to me. I was also thinking about AAVE, African American Vernacular English, and the ways that we get our words get read or misinterpreted, the ways that our bodies get read or misinterpreted, and the ways that we can kind of take that back by reclaiming things. So this project is called BAD, which in African American Vernacular English actually means good, and it's an acronym for Black House Dinner. So what I did was I invited 5 or 6 friends over who are queer or trans, who have a presence in social media, doing Instagram or other types of self-representation and self-documentation, and we got together and we kikied, which in African American Vernacular English means we hung out and had a great time and lined and partied together. So this is a very intimate space, it's a private space. It was an attempt for us to get together and spend time together because we're also all busy artists and we don't have a lot of time. So we got together and we spent this time together, and I invited everybody to take 2 photographs documenting what had happened in the night. So they got to choose what moment was most significant to them. They got to choose who it was that they wanted to document, how they wanted to document it, how they wanted to set it up. And that was the only ask that I had for them. Come, line, we're gonna eat, but please take 2 photographs during the night. And so these are some of the photographs that they took. There was this beautiful moment where Manny, who is 9, just suddenly broke out into doing all of this voguing, which I didn't know that he could do, but Queer Spawn are amazing. And so he just suddenly did all of this voguing, and at the end was like, ah. And that's the only photograph I got because I was so like drawn into the act of them just actually performing. So anyway, so these are the images that they took. So I would consider this to be a collaboration. This is Rodney DeVerlis, who you saw in Jaws' piece, Dainty Smith, Raven Wings, and Jasmine Fife, and of course Manny and Janine Carrington. So together we created BAD, which is actually good. Yeah, thank you.
And then we're going to turn around and we're going to look at Samra's work, again, talking about family.
So I'm fighting a cold right now and my brain's a bit foggy, so I have some notes. So I kind of make sense. The project that you're seeing, the photo project, is called Just Me and Ella. So I'm gonna start this off by like a little story. My younger brother, years ago, he asked me why I choose to call myself a Muslim. And I'm really close to my brother, and it took me a while, but I finally understood what he actually meant. And what he actually meant was, why do I, choose to keep calling myself Muslim, even though queer folks are not always fully embraced in mainstream Muslim spaces, like the mosque. Sometimes we have to hide ourselves, our true authentic self. So that is kind of what he meant. It sort of took me a while to really come up with an answer. And I think it sort of started this whole journey for me. And what I came up with was that, it's the lens through which I see the world. So even if we're not embraced by mainstream Islam, it's how I sort of see everything. It's an identity that has shaped who I am. It's how I see fashion, music, politics, activism, gender, faith, art, basically everything. Oftentimes I think, whether it's my writing or my photography, usually when I'm working on something, it's it's a way for me to kind of understand what it is that I'm thinking about. Where I am at, like psychologically. And I guess sort of why I choose to call myself Muslim, and why other folks who identify as queer and Muslim choose to call themselves Muslim, is sort of a journey that kind of began for me a few years ago. And that is when I launched this project. And I think what I learned through this photo project was that my community, which I was having kind of a really difficult time finding, is not really limited by geography. It's kind of, my community is kind of everywhere. It could be folks who identify as queer Muslim who live in Paris, or who live in, Berlin. So it's that is kind of what makes me feel connected to other people. And it's expansive, it's kind of like ideological. And we're all connected by the belief that Islam has shaped our lives, even if we're made to feel like there's no room for people like us. Yeah, so that's my photo project. So you see in front of you 6 subjects, and I don't know if some of you are familiar with Al-Farouk Kaki. He's the gentleman in the green top. He sort of inspired me to launch this project. He founded, one of the first queer mosques, I would say, in the world. It's called Unity Mosque, and it's kind of, I sort of wanted to capture the spirit of the mosque through this project. It's sort of one of the first times where I felt accepted as my true authentic self. It wasn't segregated by gender, which is oftentimes the experience when you go to traditional mosques. So yeah, it inspired me to launch this project. And the folks that you see in front of you, they're from different parts of the world. You have, Layla, who I photographed in Berlin. You have Senna, who lives in Toronto. You have Ari, who I photographed in Paris. And then in the end, you have Unique, who I photographed in Brooklyn. And one thing that I found really fascinating while photographing subjects for this project was their interpretation of Islamic teachings. So, for example, Unique and Layla, they both cover their head, but how they sort of interpret that sort of changes every day based on their aesthetic and based on their personal style. So, yeah. So it sort of started this new journey for me, I guess.
And from there, I'm going to hand it over to Jocelyn, because I think in looking at unity and a space in which people gather and find their chosen family, it's good to talk about location and space. And I'm sorry we have the soundtrack of Chase's film to talk over and around.
So I'm Jocelyn. This project is a fusion of 3 things that are very meaningful to me: archiving, my love of documenting space, and queer identity. So this project started coming together for me recently on a trip to Mexico City, where I thought I was going to sort of have this eat, pray, love moment where I was gonna wake up early in the mornings and meditate, write in my journal, when what ended up happening was I went to a bunch of queer parties and then just danced until dawn. And being in those spaces was very impactful and very meaningful for me because I felt a sense of community and a sense of sanctuary that really transcended geography, so that really stayed with me. I Know a Place is a series documenting locations, places, spaces of celebration and pleasure within Toronto's queer history and how those spaces are essential to queer liberation. Marginalized people experience fear, oppression, and even violence just for being who we are, so it's really critical for us to have spaces where we can desire and express ourselves freely and have the space to heal through joy and celebration. I executed these works by printing archival images onto fabric and then installing them in their current day spaces and then re-photographing those installations in the hope of creating an intergenerational dialogue among the images and encourage conversations around archiving and memory, gentrification and space. How do we define space when the spaces that we gather at keep disappearing? I staged the photos in a protest banner style because pleasure is a political issue. I worked with the archives for this project, formerly the Canadian Lesbian and Gay Archives, which is the largest independent archive of LGBTQ2SI material in the world. The first image here is by Gerald Hannon, who is a member of the Body Politic, which was a Canadian magazine that ran monthly in the 70s and 80s that documented the gay rights movement at the time. And this image is of a kiss-in protest that was staged in response to 2 gay rights activists being arrested for kissing in public at the corner of Yonge and Bloor in 1976. The second image that I printed is of the Oakleaf steam baths, which is by Duncan McLaren. That is at Bathurst and Queen and is no longer in operation. Historically, bathhouses have been spaces for queer people to connect and to cruise and to have sex, and many of them have been raided by the police. A shortcoming of working with the archives was that most of the materials I encountered represented a very specific demographic, that being a white, cis, gay male demographic. The archives used to operate on a passive acquisition model, meaning they have acquired most of their materials by donation, and they have recently shifted to an active acquisition model in the hopes of representing the queer community as a whole. So given the gaps in the materials in the archives, my future direction for the project is to connect with people over their personal archives. So the image here that's mounted is actually from my personal collection, which is of the drag queen Sissy Nine performing at a trans-owned bar at Bloor and Havelock in Toronto called The Study, which is also now closed. It's obvious to say that space is always changing and evolving, especially in a place like the GTA. And everyone has a community, and every community needs a space to gather. The feeling of togetherness gives us a sense of possibility and of hope for the future. So this project originally started in Toronto, but I would love for it to grow to include communities across the province and across the country. And I was recently awarded a grant by the Ontario Arts Council to continue working on the project. So if anyone here or anyone you know has materials in their personal archives relating to queer place and space, then please don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks.
Yeah, maybe someone from Burlington can tell me where we can go. I was like, when I went to Positive Space Network and was talking about, so where are the queer bars here? They're like, there are none. It's like, maybe if on the Thursday night we just go to like Emma's back porch or something like that, and just do that every Thursday, then there we go, queer bar. So talking about steam, sweat, bodily fluids, it's your turn. I know, I was working on that one. And no, we're not talking about cactus.
Those of you that are right by the speaker might want to come a little forward, just for your personal safety. So this work is mine and that of Chase Joint, whose work you might also have seen up the corridor. There's Framing Agnes, a wonderful short documentary that's screening that you heard the music from. I met Chase over a decade ago because my work is generally documentary. I come from a photojournalism background. And so I've spent most of my career documenting the queer community, the arts community in Toronto, mostly performance type work. And I met Chase as a young artist finding their way, and I asked them to be part of several transgender-focused series that I was working on, where I met several people that are here today as well. And over the years, I've made portraits of Chase over and over again, seeing them through their transition, through his transition, him through my own gender queerness. And when they called me at the beginning of the year and said, I want to work on a project together, I thought, we're going to make some portraits. And then he arrived at my apartment and was like, how do you feel about doing something totally out of your element? And I said, I'm at a point in my life where that's entirely what I want to do and what I'm aiming for. And he said, okay, I have this idea. And so what we wanted to do with this, what Chase came to me with, is how can we discuss transition and how can we discuss that kind of movement in life and that kind of change in the body outside of sort of chronological narratives, outside of the work that I usually do, that he usually does, which is documenting month by month, week by week, seeing something change. And also do it without the body, without the obvious pictures that we're so used to making and relying on when it comes to expressing transition. So what you're looking at are remnants of Chase doing his testosterone injections each week. And so Chase was working across the continent touring his film, and so he would come visit me every few weeks, and we'd sit down, and he would inject the testosterone that is the daily life of anyone who has transitioned. And then he would just dab his leg, and there would be a little blood, a little testosterone left on a piece of paper that I'd given him. And I set up in my studio a macro setup where we would get in as close as physically possible to this small mark of that moment in time. And his body chemistry at that time, the air, the paper, the existence in my studio of both of us in that space. And I would try to get as close as possible to create this, what reminded us a lot of sort of Rorschach tests of like ink blots, but then became landscapes and became scars and became small galaxies. And it became this beautiful sort of poetic space to explore transition and what a body looks like at a moment of time, outside of its physical appearance and all the things that kind of stress us out as queer people. And yeah, so the work was done over the course of the last year. This is a small sample of it, and get as close to it as you like. And the idea was just to kind of leave you with a space of, yeah, looking at transition as something more sort of poetic and ethereal and abstract.
I think we should move into this space here. We've got a little bit more room to go around. And then I'm gonna start handing the mic out to y'all. And then I'm gonna start off with one question. And then, so maybe all the artists wanna come up here because then I can just hand the mic back and forth. Thinking about the power of a portrait, power of visibility, someone came up to me last night at the opening and said that some of the images made her feel very uncomfortable, that she felt very voyeuristic as a cis straight woman, that she felt outside of many of the images and felt as though she didn't have the right to be looking at some of these, and that discomfort. And I realized that when we produce exhibitions like this that have the possibility of change, that discomfort is part of change. But I wanted to ask you about visibility and the portrait and the power of a portrait. Anybody wants to jump in on that? No? Yeah?
I struggle with the term visibility for me in my own practice. I understand why we talk about it a lot, and I understand why people would describe it as a goal for their work, but I'm not invisible, right? Like, you can all see me. So this idea that visibility, I don't think, for me, visibility is not enough. So for me to make a portrait that just says, I exist, this is what I look like, mostly we're talking about, mainstream representation, and lack of visibility means we're invisible in certain spaces, but we're not actually invisible. We are very visible to each other, we are very visible in our communities. And so for me, it's more interesting and more important for me to try to tell you something about what it is like to move through the world looking the way I do, as opposed to just, this is what I look like. And I also feel that, just referencing the comment that audience member made, like I understand that discomfort. I have felt that discomfort myself when I look at images, certain images by other artists. But I also feel that part of what I do as an artist is give you permission to look. So, don't look at the woman in the coffee shop. Like, look at spend as much time as you need to with that discomfort, looking at my photograph to try to move through that discomfort. Like, I'm giving you that permission to do that.
I mean, for the dinner project, so much of what we were trying to grapple with was public and private and what gets shown. And for Black people, in particular for Black artists, all of them are Black artists, we often have our images used and reused again and again and again by institutions to diversify their final year catalog or to diversify their promo or material. And so our images get taken and get used and appropriated to signal diversity or to symbolize diversity. And we were trying to think about what it would mean if instead we were in control of our own images. And what it would mean to really get to know these people as individuals, not as somebody who you see on the BAM Center catalog doing a dance jeté or something, but as an actual person. So we were grappling with that, but I have a lot of discomfort myself with sharing private Black space because there is something really beautiful about it being private. So this is part of why I didn't want to be the one taking the photographs of what was happening at the dinner, because then it would be my lens sort of exposing this private space. I wanted them to be in charge of doing it themselves and choosing what to share and what not to share. Because as many photos as there are tons of things that happen that we didn't document that remain private, and I think that's really beautiful.
This is kind of the first project that I've made that hasn't directly been about my trans identity, and it's not really a topic of conversation in these photographs with us. It's not in the forefront. The last major body of work that I've made that I continue to work on is a self-portrait documentation project, like you were speaking of, that is commonly seen like a timeline sort of project, which was a very vulnerable space for me to express that, and it was at a time when I wasn't seeing a lot of that, and now I kind of recognize that I want to move past that as well, because it is so overused by the public and exploited in different ways. Obviously, being white, I'm not exploited in many ways that other people are, but I think it was really awesome to make a project about something that I felt we could have people connect with on a more universal level, like talking about intimacy and vulnerability between masculine people isn't something that needs to be about our transness, but it is an interesting aspect to the project. So if there is discomfort in viewing our portraits, I would hope that it's more a discomfort surrounding the way we view masculine intimacy and not necessarily our bodies.
I think that, part of what we experience as trans masculine people in showing intimacy is an assumption of our gayness, which is that's not our, we both have female partners, and I think there's for me at least, I can definitely say that there's an element of my own fear of being perceived as a gay man, even though, of course, I support everybody else in their expressions of being gay men, and it's a really weird internal struggle as a trans person to be misconstrued in that way. And I think doing a project like this where we kind of embraced that perception was both scary to be in these some of these public spaces showing that kind of intimacy, but also was liberating. And because of our trans experience, I think that undertone in the images, we're able to, I guess, approach intimacy between our bodies in a different way, not having grown up as boys and being conditioned in a way to where if you're expressing intimacy or gay. Like that wasn't our experience. So yeah, it came more naturally. Yeah.
I actually just wanted to bring up something that Michelle and I talked about yesterday, and you mentioned the term possibility model, which I think is a good term for everyone to sit with in terms of visibility. So even though I don't really have any portraiture in my work, for me it was exciting to see all the younger kids at the show yesterday, just seeing all this and seeing the freedom to express yourself. And so I think that's the thing that really stuck with me from last night.
But also public conversations too. Like you're not going to be doing something like that and not have individuals approach you during the portraits. So, and then Sam, I have to put you on the spot, but to put you on the spot. Yeah, you want to talk about? No, just in regards to portraits and the relationship you have with the subjects.
I just wanted to add to the earlier conversation. Like when I take portraits, it's a very collaborative process. Like I don't like to approach it as I'm directing you. Usually I spend some time with my subjects to sort of get a sense of who they are. And you can't see it in the show, but there are interviews that are part of the show. And, my hope with that, adding that layer, was that I was hoping that it would counteract what people's projections are, usually of Muslim folks, usually what you read in mainstream media. I was hoping that sort of adding that complex narrative would sort of broaden people's understanding of how complex these folks are. And so I thought that element was really important to add to these portraits, because if you don't really know anything about these folks, you can sort of project whatever you want onto them, right? With the limited understanding that you might have.
Jai, did you want to talk at all about the portraits?
I guess in regards to people being uncomfortable, I love making people feel uncomfortable, especially when it has to do with masculinity. Because I feel like coming from a Jamaican background, masculinity is very hyper masculine, and I'm just the opposite of that. And so for me, I think a lot of the people feeling uncomfortable has stemmed from, or have come from more black men specifically, of feeling uncomfortable with me kind of talking about being vulnerable and kind of redefining what our ideas of what masculinity is, more specifically black masculinity. And so, I also am a believer too, in order for us to heal and get to a place, we do need to be uncomfortable. And I think as we navigate and we continue to, do our things day to day, there are a lot of things that I come across that do make me feel uncomfortable as well. But I have to sit with that, and I have to, kind of take that in for myself and question why I'm uncomfortable. So I think it's a beautiful thing that there is some type of discomfort when you are viewing things, because I think that if you take that in a good way, it does push you to question yourself and question your own ideas of of life. And there's so many things, everything is so fluid, there's a lot of fluidity in life, and you're allowed to be uncomfortable. So I'm not trying to take that away, and I'm not trying to get you to feel some type of comfort.
Does anybody want to break in and ask a question? Make yourself uncomfortable? No?
It was interesting last night, if I'm not mistaken, but there was a large gentleman here wearing a Harley Davidson jacket, beautiful cowboy boots, and he was photographing in the cabaret, and he turned around and said, because nobody will ever believe I was here. And about an hour and a half to 2 hours later, he was still here, my friend pouring, looking around, and I thought, it was really interesting think I get what you're asking, and I mean, for me, I was very conscious of what it would mean to show a whole bunch of portraits of Black, queer, and trans people in Burlington, right? Like, I don't know Burlington very well, but I really enjoy spending time here when I have come here. But my impression of a lot of towns outside of downtown Toronto is that there aren't as many Black people visibly on the streets. And so what would it mean to create a whole bunch of images, like a family mural wall, of Black, queer, and trans people in this place? And I was really excited about that as a possibility. I had this conversation with someone last night in the courtyard, and she was walking with, she was a person of color, who's queer. She was walking with her mom by the waterfront and saw people standing in front of the gallery and said, oh, I wonder what's happening. And she came in, and then she was like, what is happening here? Because Faye and Fluffy were here, there was QT BIPOC artists all over. She was like, I came in and there was queer things, there were people of color, there were Black people, like what is happening? She was so excited, and I was like, this is why we're doing this, you know, is because we need to reinsert the narratives. Of course, we know that Black people have existed across the north part of Turtle Island for hundreds and hundreds of years. There are Black people in Burlington. There's probably a thriving Black community in Burlington, but it's not visible in the most obvious of ways. And so I really enjoy inserting something into the space. I'm thankful for the opportunity.
So that's actually part of the practice itself, part of the work itself is the direct communication with us, which we're very, very grateful for.
And for me too, the idea of doing an identity-based exhibition was not something that I'm actually interested in doing at all. I think we've moved beyond identity-based exhibitions in the 90s. And so, but being able to have something like this and the imperative of moving forward under the auspice of producing an education guide and in a space that people could come to as a pedagogical platform as well. But it doesn't lose the aesthetics within this space, that like all of your practices are strongly situated within many different art communities. And yesterday it was really nice for the Burlington community to see the Toronto art community, for the Toronto art community to see the queer community, for like all of these individuals to bump up against each other and be in this space and have that moment of like, I can't believe that I'm here and this is happening.
Yeah, and just to Robert's point, I actually don't think the aesthetics, I think the aesthetics is actually part of the educational platform, because whether people realize it or not, there's an education in this show about mostly video and photography. So you have all kinds of photographic strategies, all kinds of portraiture strategies in conversation with each other. So by moving through the show, even if you weren't thinking about the identity and